Tom, over the weekend, there were Biden rallies all over the country.
Yeah.
There's sort of been this...
Wait, did he win?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know either.
I mean, I really don't. The media claims he won. We all know the media doesn't decide who the president is.
That's right.
Different media outlets are saying different things. There's a lot of questions about the validity of some of these legal challenges. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of these legal challenges to stand.
Right.
But there are some pretty disturbing and pretty troubling accusations being made. By poll workers, by postal service workers. There's this Guardian, no, it's not Guardian, something like that though, the voting machine that was used in 30 states, including Colorado. They've already reversed 6,000 votes that went through it that were votes for Trump that went to Biden in Michigan. In one county in Michigan, it counted 6,000 votes that were for Trump as votes for Biden. They did reverse that.
I wish I knew more about that technology because I don't understand how that's possible.
Well, you know who to ask? Nancy Pelosi's husband, because he's on the board of directors of the company.
Well, there you go.
I mean, you talk about the swamp, right?
Yeah.
Now there's accusations that that same machine did something with upwards of 20,000 votes in Pennsylvania, in one county in Pennsylvania.
And that matters. Pennsylvania's the numbers that we have right now, and I know there are still things are moving, right, and changing, but I mean they're within 20 or 30,000 votes of each other.
Right.
So that's a big deal.
And another 10,000 votes in one county in Wisconsin, and now the Arizona GOP has filed a lawsuit in Arizona that Maricopa County specifically. They're still trying to get a hold of the numbers. Maricopa County was supposed to be, or is supposed to be, the largest Republican county in the country.
Okay.
By raw numbers,
Okay.
there are more Republicans in Maricopa County, Arizona, than any other county in the country. And Trump won it by a slim margin, which he won it by a large margin. And the real person who's leading the effort in the lawsuits there is Martha McSally, because it also likely cost her Senate seat.
Right.
They used this same voting machine down there. So there's all kinds of questions. How is this going to go? Your guess is kind of as good as mine. If this does end up getting reversed after the parades and the parties and the celebrations I saw this weekend in Denver alone, and then in some of these other cities, New York, California.
Maybe those turn into riots.
Right. There was a comment on one of the radio shows this morning as I was heading in here saying, "Don't take the boards off your shops just yet."
Right.
All of that said, there was one thing. I mean, look, if people want to celebrate that their guy won, let them. I don't care. It's not going to affect my life. But there was one or two instances that I saw throughout this whole thing that really kind of made me concerned. I was sitting at brunch on Lincoln of all streets,
right,
in Denver, about 5 blocks south of the Capitol.
For those who don't know the geography of Denver, Lincoln is a main thoroughfare that runs north and south, and the intersection of Lincoln and Colfax, and those names are both important. Lincoln, of course, was president during the Civil War. Colfax was a representative who helped to push through the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. The intersection of those two streets is where the state capitol is, right downtown Denver. Right,
and Colfax is about 15th Street, if you're counting numbers, and I was at 10th.
Okay.
So we are sitting having late brunch, lunch, whatever you want to call it, on Saturday morning, Saturday around noon, and all of a sudden this parade for Biden, and we're seeing people marching through the streets, banging on pots and pans and drums, and people dancing in ways that kind of make you wonder if they're taking liberties with some of Colorado's lesser drug laws. And then all of a sudden, a car drives by and stops right outside the window, right next to my seat. And it's a guy waving the communist flag. And I'm just sitting there thinking,
was it the Soviet version, the red flag with the yellow
yellow hammer and sickle?
Hammer and sickle, yeah. Okay.
The Soviet version.
Yeah.
which I don't know that he knew it was the Soviet version or
Right.
And I sat there and I actually said to my table, and I was at brunch with a lot of people who were Biden supporters. You know, I'm trying to maintain friendships. I'm trying to not make politics my whole life. And I said, you know, I haven't said a word. I've kept my mouth shut. You guys know how involved in all of this I am. I haven't said a word through the whole brunch. But that right there, that makes me sad. Not angry.
Right.
Not like I want to go on a vengeful rampage. It just makes me sad. It makes me sad that there are people in Denver, Colorado, in the United States of America that want to wave the Russian communist flag. And somebody at my table turns to me and says, why would that make you sad? It's great. They can believe in that and maybe it's not so bad. You treat communism like it's the boogeyman.
Indeed, it is the boogeyman.
I said, it's killed over 100 million people in the last 150, 170 years. Of course I think it's the boogeyman. And you know who a large percentage of those people were? They were Jews.
Yeah.
So, of course, don't tell me I shouldn't fear communism. I sat there thinking, and I got pretty quiet the rest of brunch. And it brings me back to the same conversation of we're seeing a more pronounced, I mean, it's been this case for a long time, but we're seeing a more pronounced reality of you either believe in constitutional self-government or you believe in progressive central planning. Yeah. And progressive central planning, just to remind everybody, we've said this over and over and over again over the years or over the months. Progressive central planning takes many, many forms. It can take the form of communism, socialism. It can be a pharaoh or an emperor or a Caesar or a dictator or a democratically elected socialist, as in Adolf Hitler.
I would add a one qualification, and I think I don't want to be nitpicky here, but I think it's important to equip our members of the Vino Veritas Society to be able to talk in ways, intelligent, thoughtful ways that can persuade other people. There is one striking difference between tyranny in the ancient world, ancient tyrannies, and modern tyrannies. When I say modern, I mean the last century and a half.
Sure.
Most ancient tyrannies, simply the tyrant, whatever title he gave himself, demanded certain patronage. You shall pay up. And some thugs would come around, usually government agents, right? And as long as you paid your duties to the tyrant for the most part left you alone. He was ruling for his own sake. That was Aristotle's definition of tyranny. The tyrant rules for his good rather than the good of the people he's ruling. So he was just mainly it meant taking money and sometimes property.
And for those who need a visual representation of that, think back to the original Robin Hood.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yes.
It's funny. They always define Robin Hood as he stole from the rich to give to the poor.
Right.
He didn't steal from the rich citizens. He stole from the government.
Right.
He stole from the king.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I'm generalizing here, and it is mostly true. That was ancient tyranny. Modern tyranny tends to be totalitarian tyranny for a couple of reasons. One is modern tyranny in an age of equality, an age where the idea of equality and different variations of that idea are wildly popular.
Sure.
In ways that they weren't in the ancient world. And so modern tyranny tends to be democratic tyranny. The tyrant, the guy who's going to become a tyrant later, maybe no one knows right at the moment he's a future tyrant, but they tend to get elected. They tend to be quite popular, which means they have to offer lots of people things. You also have a change in technology in modern that allows those in government to see and monitor and influence people, control people in ways that were impossible in the ancient world. And so modern tyrannies tend to be totalitarian, meaning government gets involved in every aspect. They're not satisfied with just taking some booty, demanding some sort of grist or payment. They want to control what the schools do, where you live, how you run your business, what medicines you may and may not take, how you're going to access healthcare. They want to control all aspects of life. And that's the real central planning. Modern totalitarian tyrannies
Right.
are the models of progressive central planning. And we've said this before, and it is a point that is so important, it's worth repeating. Academics love to make these distinctions between socialism and communism, national socialism versus democratic socialism, right? Communism, fascism. And the truth is, at the root, they're effectively all the same thing. They're all versions of progressive central planning. The government is telling people how they're going to live their lives, what they may and may not do with their own property. You know, if you look into the formal definition of fascism, for example, it will say it is a socioeconomic system in which private property is retained by the owners, but government tells you what to do with your private property. So, you know, at that point, it becomes, if you have a little piece of paper that says this business, for example, that's your property, you legally own it, and we're the government, and we're telling you, here's what you shall do. You're going to run your business the way we say, or we're taking it away from you.
Right.
Is it really yours, right? At that point, what's the difference between fascism and communism? And so all these great tyrannies over the past century, Soviet communism, Chinese communism, German fascism, Italian fascism, they're all expressions of the same body of social science. Progressive central planning social science. They just manifested themselves in slightly different ways.
And I don't want to keep rehashing Trump's presidency through this. And you know, whatever happens, he might have something big might change this, and he might end up with 4 more years. But it's looking like the opposite. At the same time, there's just such an irony to all of these progressive Democrats calling him a fascist.
Yes. Saying,
you're a fascist. We have a fascist president. And then complaining that he doesn't do enough central planning when it comes to COVID. I mean, which do you want? Do you want him to be a central planner? Do you want him to tell you how to take care of yourself, or do you not?
Right. Well, what it represents is tremendous confusion on the part of many progressives about the idea of government and about fascism itself. They tend, well, first of all, most progressives, this has been my experience, most progressives they know very little about their own progressivism. They don't know the history of the very movement of which they're part. And they don't know much about the history of the various strains of progressivism, like fascism. I think many progressives, when they think of fascism, they think of it as a personality type. Mm-hmm. The strong man dictator, the Mussolini, the Hitler, and it's just a personality type. So if you're kind of loud and aggressive and rude, that makes you a fascist. Because you have that personality type.
Right.
They don't understand that fascism actually means government coming in and commandeering private property and businesses and really the entire economy. The New Deal under FDR was fascism, according to the scholarly, technical, historical definition of fascism. And in the case of Trump, it's really ironic because the last thing a fascist would do, a fascist would not reduce government regulations.
Right.
Because regulations are a source of government power, control. A fascist increases regulations. A fascist would not appoint strict construction originalists to the courts because those kinds of judges tend to rein in government power. A fascist would appoint those who believe in a living constitution or who just don't care about the Constitution at all, who are just going to rubber stamp everything the government does. And so you're right, there's this tremendous irony in taking this guy who has done some things, some good things, to try to limit the power of our gigantic fascist government.
Right.
He's trying to limit, and they call him fascist for that.
Right. So understanding these two ideas, right? We have this now battle that is become front and center, and it has existed since FDR.
Self-government versus central planning.
Right. And it's been a battle since FDR. It's been a battle since Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
But to me, it hasn't been as much of a battle among citizens. There's been a small minority of citizens who like to live in communes, and they get depicted in movies and different things, talking about everybody kind of does their fair share and everybody gets what they need.
Right.
But that hasn't been a mainstream thought. I never thought we'd get to a day that somebody could drive down the streets of a major city waving the communist flag and be cheered for it.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. So with that premise in mind, or with that concept in mind, I'd like to offer a premise to you. And I think there's an opportunity for us to talk it through and help our audience actually understand what we're looking at. And that premise is if we have candidates who want to be successful, we have a lot of members who are involved in their local GOP parties, who are run for office, who are planning to run for office in the future. And we have even more friends who have done that. We had friends who ran for Congress this time around. We have friends who in different states, not just in Colorado.
Right.
And I want to propose that going forward, they should make their entire campaign about that dichotomy, about that binary choice.
Self-government versus central planning. Yeah.
And our job as the Vino Veritas Society is to explain to people why that self-government sandbox is a better, more fun sandbox to play in.
Yeah.
As opposed to we have been playing in the progressive sandbox for years, for decades.
We need to talk that through. And I think a good thing to add here, the two of us, for our members, our listeners right now, we bring kind of a unique experiences to this whole discussion. I'm a guy who's been studying political philosophy, political history my whole life. I'm a scholar of those things. You're a guy who has decades of experience in not just marketing in a broad sense, but in particular branding. This idea of creating a name, an image, something that people associate with when they hear
the emotional
something.
Connection, right?
The emotional connection.
That's what I always talk about with clients or friends when I'm talking about branding. It's what's the emotional connection you make when you hear that name, when you hear something or see something that associates you with that company. Does it make your skin crawl? Does it make the hair on your arms stand up?
Right.
Do you get excited? Do you get scared? Do you get angry? Do you get happy? I mean, what is that emotional response?
Right. And so what we are talking about here, the two of us, is really an exercise in branding. We are saying Republicans, number one, if they want to win, and number two, if they want to deserve to win, if they want to do something good for the United States, if they want to help save what is left of our constitutional republic, they should adopt this brand. They should help to promote this brand. Here's what Republican means. It means choosing self-government. On the individual basis, you govern yourself. You make your own choices, right? And in the broader political sense, constitutional self-government, when there are big important questions as a nation, we the people should make those decisions, not some unknown, unnamed bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., in some faraway bureaucracy.
And
that's the brand.
And we the people should make it within the constraints of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that gets lost. And I've had so many arguments with people over the last couple of weeks about people who are saying the Constitution is bad and the Constitution is racist and the Declaration was xenophobic and sexist and this and that. And that's going to be a big issue that we're going to be tackling for a very long time to come. But that's part of what the draw to what our new sandbox,
right,
with better sand and with more toys and with more space and more freedom.
And so let's give a little background here, because I certainly agree that conservatives, libertarians, free marketeers, constitutionalists, Republicans in general, they have been playing in the progressive sandbox for years, for decades. What that basically means is progressives throw out all kinds of programs, policies, laws, regulations, subsidies, and then Republicans, conservatives, libertarians of various stripes, people who oppose those things, they get into the progressive sandbox and they want to tweak these progressive programs or policies. In other words, they're granting the legitimacy of the subsidy, of the regulation, of the program. They're just saying, well, let's change this amount of this subsidy from this dollar amount to that dollar amount. Things like that. Here's kind of an experiment, just a thought experiment that I think will help the listener think through to this branding binary choice we're emphasizing between self-government and central planning. If we go back to the New Deal, and this exercise, this hypothetical is just meant to highlight how old this problem is. Franklin Roosevelt, who brought in the New Deal, really was the man who, more than anyone else, expanded the federal government far, far beyond the limits of the Constitution. He was first elected in 1932. He was reelected in 1936. He then gets elected for a third time in 40. He's elected the fourth and final time in 44. He dies in 45.
Right.
If we were sitting here in 1940 when he was running for the third time, so there's a lot. He's already done a lot. He has created hundreds of federal bureaus and commissions and offices. The federal government is telling cleaners how much they shall charge to press a pair of dress slacks.
Right.
In fact, there's a guy in New York State. He actually went to prison because he charged like 3 cents under what the federal guideline was, because he's trying to be competitive, right? They are telling farmers how many crops they're going to grow. They're going in, they're slaughtering. The federal government, the United States Department of Agriculture, slaughtered millions of little piglets and calves because they were trying to reduce the supply to drive prices up, because that was good for farmers. Now, it was really bad for everyone who wanted to buy some bacon or hamburger or whatever. Anyway, suppose we're in 1940 and Roosevelt is running for the third time. He's doing all these things, and all these programs have utterly failed.
Right.
Unemployment is still sky high. People are hungry. They're losing their houses. They can't pay their mortgages. I mean, things are really ugly and bad. Sure. And if you were to ask me, if you said, Tom, what is this really all about? Do we need to tweak some of these regulations and some of these subsidies? I would have said in 1940, no. It's not about a bad regulation here, or this subsidy amount is too big or too small. I would have said, Dave, the fundamental choice here is, are we going to govern ourselves? We're going to make our own choices, or are we going to have unelected bureaucrats telling us how to live our lives? That's what it really comes down to. All the ugliness going out on farms across the country, that's what it's really all about. Do we just leave farmers alone and say, run your farm however you want to run it, wisely or foolishly? That's up to you. And compete. Or we're going to have government control. That was true in 1940. And that basic binary choice between self-government and central planning, it hasn't changed. Here we are in 2020. We are down the road 80 years since then, and we have the same basic choice. The difference is, in 2020, government now regulates far more than it did in 1940. It subsidizes far more. It takes more money from people than it did then. The federal there are more bureaucrats, far more than there were back then. Right. There are more regulations. There's more of all of that stuff. And at the heart of it, it's this basic question. You made the point, and I'm gonna reinforce it. No one then in 1940 or in the 1960s or in the 1970s or 80s or 90s, politicians typically, with very few exceptions, they didn't run on that brand. They didn't run on that theme. They didn't say, here's what this is all about. Ronald Reagan, to his credit, and he's kind of an outlier. He was sort of unusual. Mm-hmm. He gave an important speech in 1964. He gave it the title, A Time for Choosing. And in fact, this is what led to him getting elected governor of California. And I recommend people, you can Google it, right? You can find it on YouTube.
You know what I think we should do? I think in the next week or so, we should put a link to that video on our website.
We'll do it.
We've talked about it before.
It's maybe like 25 minutes long, roughly?
It's just over 27 minutes.
Okay, yeah. So it's not real long.
And for those who didn't realize it, 2 weeks ago was the anniversary of that speech. It was October 27th, 1964.
Yeah.
Right before the November vote.
Yep.
I think we should put it up. I think it's a really important, I think it's one of the best political speeches that's been delivered in this country since the days of Lincoln.
Right. I agree with that. We will put that link up and let all of our members know about it. And the point is, Reagan was unusual.
Right.
Now, that helped him to get elected, running on that theme. It helped him get elected president in 1980. He was still sounding that basic theme of, are you going to govern yourself? You're going to make your own choices? You're going to be responsible for yourself and your family? Or is government going to come and tell you how to live your life and run your business and raise your children and everything else? And that message that Reagan sounded has been kind of lost.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more important now than ever before. So the basic alternatives, self-government versus central planning, that has not changed. That was the fundamental core critical question in 1940. It is the core critical question in 2020. And what has changed is we're here to suggest more people talk about it. Let's brand this basic alternative.
Let's embrace it. So with that said, because we could go on for hours talking about the different ways that progressivism has turned into all of these things and all of the bad things that have happened to people because of it. You know, people love to talk about cronyism today, but they're fooling themselves if they don't think in 1940 FDR had friends who were getting rich off of all of his programs. If he didn't have friends that owned certain farms that were getting to farm more or grow different things that he was preventing everybody else from. And I mean, that's been happening as the government started growing.
You bet.
It happened under Wilson. It happened probably under Hoover quite a bit. It happened under FDR.
I've boiled it down to this. It's actually quite simple. There are two things government can do that incentivizes corruption. One is when government gives money away, whether it's giving money away to individuals, businesses, foreign governments like Ukraine. When it gives away money, that incentivizes people to start bribing those in government. Hey, for example, if I was the Ukrainian government and I say, I would really like one of those $1 billion grants, United States, I'm over here, and the United States says, yeah, we're not interested in you, Ukraine. I could say, well, we, the Ukrainian government, we control a gas company. You give us that $1 billion and we'll give some of that money to the gas company who will give it to your son, Joe.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, Joe becomes interested. Well, now maybe we have a grant for you, right? So giving money away incentivizes corruption, but also regulating,
right,
controlling what people do with their property, how they run their business. What happens with regulations is businesses, especially big businesses, now are incentivized to bribe government to give them a waiver, to give them an exemption so that these regulations that apply to all the competitors, this big business here says, we don't want it to apply to us. We don't want to have to comply with it.
And that happens in foreign countries too also.
That's right.
Right? I mean, you talk about we'll give your son money.
Yeah.
But in the Ukraine, the other example is, you want this money? We don't want that guy as your attorney general anymore.
That's right.
Get rid of him.
That's right.
Or we don't want you. Talk about some of these accords, some of these regulations on different countries. You want $150 billion from us, Iran? You're going to do these things.
Right.
So it's the same thing.
So these are one of this is I have to emphasize this because we live in a very progressive world. This is not a feeling, and this is not an emotion. This isn't an opinion. This is one of these timeless truths about government. The more subsidies and regulations you have, the more corruption you will have. And yet we don't seem to be able to learn that lesson, because what we've done, we Americans, as we increase subsidies and regulations, corruption grows too. And the progressive class insists that the solution to corruption are more regulations, right? Which doesn't reduce it creates whole new classes of regulators who can be bribed, right?
New classes of regulators. I want people to hear that. You didn't say new classes of regulations. You said new class of regulators.
That's right, regulators.
And it's more people who are in the bureaucracy, who are getting paid to figure out how to run our lives for us so that we can't run it ourselves. So, okay, so we've established all of this. Let's try to spend the rest of this time focused on what does our sandbox look like, right? If we're going to brand this, what does our sandbox look like? What are the conversations that we should be having? And what are the conversations that aren't part of our sandbox?
And part of that, tell me if you agree with this, I think we got to describe both sandboxes because arguably, and I'm kind of curious to hear what your opinion is on this, arguably, progressive Democrats have done a better job at branding Republicans than they have of branding themselves. Arguably. This is a question here of judgment. Here's what I mean. I don't know that millions of Americans think the next progressive programs are going to be great. They're going to be wonderful. I'm fully confident in them. I am confident that many progressive Democrats think those Republicans are racist. They're fascists. Where did they get this idea that they're racist and they're fascists? Progressives have branded Republicans as those things. And so what we can learn from the history of the modern Democratic Party is it's just as important to brand your opponent as it is to brand yourself. And so when we look at those two sandboxes, I'm actually going to start with the progressive sandbox. Here's what it is. It is government taking more of your money, controlling more of your property, especially your business property, but all of your property, limiting, restricting, controlling, telling you how, when, where, for what purposes you may use your property and how you may not. And they wrap that up. They don't call that control. They don't call it confiscation. They say, we're expanding the rights of some people. That's what they call it, right? They'll say, you and I were talking about this earlier in the case of, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died just 2 months ago. And so there's been this fanfare celebration of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I've been paying attention to progressives celebrating Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And one of the things they celebrate hers, they say she expanded women's rights. Now, I'm interested in I'm a Declaration of Independence guy. I'm always when someone says rights, I want to know. Well, my goodness, how were the rights of women being violated? And here's what they're talking about. In the early 1970s, this is when the whole credit card industry, the idea of credit cards was still relatively new. It was not a big way. Everyone did not have credit cards the way they do now. And most banks that were issuing credit cards, many of them did not issue credit cards to women. They only issued them to men. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought this was a terrible wrong. She had two alternatives. Now clearly there were reasons, right, why some banks want to make money. If they thought they could make money off issuing credit cards to women, they presumably some would have. There was some business reason, some financial risk calculation there, and they thought this isn't a good business move. Ruth Bader Ginsburg at that time in the early 70s was perfectly free. She had all the rights to use her own capital or attract a few investors and start her own bank and issue credit cards, offer credit cards to anybody she wanted, including women. She was free to do that. She didn't. You know what she did? She lobbied the government through lawsuits to pass a law commanding bank owners, you shall issue credit cards to this group of people, whether you want to or not. We don't care. It's your business. You technically own the title, but we're going to tell you how to run your business. And if you don't, we'll shut you down. You won't be able to operate. And they say, right, that is a victory for women's rights. But that assumes women have a right to credit cards, right? Nobody has. Right. I don't have a right to make you issue me a credit card. I don't have that right.
I mean, let's be honest what a credit card is. I'm giving you money.
That's right.
It's not some fantasy concept. I lived in Miami for a year. I know what watching people living on credit card debt really looks like.
Right.
They are taking money from somebody else, many of whom have no intention of ever paying it back.
Right.
I mean, I met people in hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt.
Right.
And this wasn't because of a housing crisis. It wasn't because they took loans out against their home.
Right.
It was the government is forcing banks to give me credit cards. I can sign up for all of these cards.
Right.
And all of a sudden, here you go. Now I can do this.
So this is just one example of how government uses legalized force to command property owners, in this case bank owners, to do something with their own property they don't want to do. Now, anybody else's, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and all of her friends, right? They were free to go start their own bank and run it the way they wanted to. They didn't choose that. Instead, they chose the progressive path of using government power to command someone to do something they didn't want to do. And they labeled it, they wrapped it up as women's rights. This is expanding women's rights. And so that's the toolbox of the sandbox of progressivism. What it means to play in that sandbox is to get in there and say, well, this law commanding banks and who maybe instead of telling them they must issue to all women, let's say they only have to issue to 95% of the women who apply. And someone else says, well, how about just 90% of women? Because there might be some women with really bad credit. So, right, that is granting the legitimacy of the federal government commanding banks. They're tweaking the details of the policy. We need to get out of that sandbox and go over into the sandbox of constitutional self-government, which looks very different.
I'm going to propose one other aspect of the progressive sandbox brand. One of them, without a doubt, is doing things, creating rules, regulations, requirements on individuals and businesses to do things in the name of rights. The other is creating rules, regulations, and requiring individuals and businesses to do things in the name of lack of trust. They don't trust us as people.
Yes.
We are not capable in their mind of making good decisions, of being self-reliant, self-assertive, self-restrained. You know, we talk about the 4 virtues of being a good citizen.
Right.
They don't believe that we as Americans can be virtuous citizens anymore.
Both in your, this progressive sandbox says, in your personal life, so the way you're going to educate your children, the dimensions of your house, all those kinds of your health care, all those things that need to be highly regulated and subsidized because you're too stupid, too incompetent, too irresponsible, and probably too dishonest, too corrupt to make those choices. So we're going to regulate that as in your individual life, and then even more so as a business owner. Because if you're part of a business, if you're part of a corporation, in the lexicon of progressivism, corporation is synonymous with pure, unfettered evil.
Right.
Corporate means evil. Evil. Corporations do evil things, and progressivism doesn't look at corporations as individual human beings working together to produce something of value to others. They look at corporation as a whole entity determined to do evil, and therefore we must surround corporations with lots of regulations to protect you and to protect me from their evil.
Sure. Well, and there's that type of trust. There's another type of trust. It's a belief in people's abilities, a belief in people's capabilities. They create laws like welfare and education and the departments of education and all of that because they don't believe that a large swath of the population is actually capable of building, owning, managing, maintaining a home.
Right.
And this has been something that has grown and grown and grown and grown over time. They're not creating welfare because they think that it's just the nice, right thing to do, and it's a violation of those people's rights not to give them something to take care of themselves. They're doing it because in most cases they don't believe that that person over there is capable of actually having a home if they want one.
And there's an added dimension of nefariousness to this progressive sandbox. In a way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because they say, hey, most people can't afford to have their own house. And then progressivism piles on regulations. What does that do to the price of housing? It makes houses more expensive. And by golly, it turns out to be true. A lot of people they cannot afford a house.
Right.
Well, why can't they afford a house? Because they're so expensive. Well, why are houses so expensive? Because of all the regulations, right, that restrict the building of houses. And so that feeds into more subsidies.
And part of that is also they're out there telling certain classes of people, we need to provide you these things, and we need to make sure you have these rights because you're not capable otherwise. They don't believe in people to that extent. There was a candidate for Congress this last time around. She lost. Her name was Angela King. She was Trump really got behind her, and a lot of people thought she had a good chance. And Angela King made a comment once that she said, she's a black woman, I'll be damned if I'm going to let my kids listen to the Democratic Party telling them they're not good enough, they're never going to be successful, they're incapable of success simply because of their skin color, because they have pigment. That's what the party was telling her.
Right.
And the party was saying, we're in this for, the progressives were saying, we're here to help you because you're just not quite good enough to be successful on your own. The world isn't going to accept you. So we've established that progressive sandbox. What does our sandbox look like? And I think that comment right there is the first thing. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter what your sexual preference is. If you come in and you take care of the sandbox equally as everybody else, you come in and you are self-reliant and self-restrained. You're not going to go try to steal from other people in the sandbox. You're not going to go see somebody and say, I want to sit in that part of the sandbox. I'm going to throw you out of it because I want to sit there. You're all welcome.
The sandbox of self-government rests on a foundation. And the foundation is this belief that human beings are amazing things, amazing beings. They are amazingly creative, innovative, inventive, entrepreneurial, that if human beings are just secure in their own personal freedom, in their own private property, what they do with their freedom is beautiful, is amazing to sit back and watch. They improve their lives. They help the people that they love. That's the foundation upon which the sandbox of self-government rests.
And we have proof that that's true.
That's right.
You look at the 125 years following the Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
It is the greatest growth in well-being, health, wealth, wellness.
Every measurement.
Every possible measurement of human achievement, of human success, of quality of life in those first 125 years.
And in fact, I want to be really accurate about this. All those measurements of human well-being went up for those who were free. For those who were unfree in America, for the slave class, those measurements didn't go up like that. And you know why? Because they weren't free. So what's the solution? If you really do care about those people who are living miserably because they're enslaved, the solution, the remedy is freedom. Make sure that they live freely too, that they're secure in their liberty and their property, and they'll experience the same kind of growth in all these metrics of human well-being as the free class had already experienced. That's right.
That sandbox says everybody who steps foot in that sandbox is going to be recognized as a free human being with the same individual natural rights, the same equality of human nature.
You just said something really important. So in other words, their rights, if you go into the self-government sandbox, number one, your rights don't depend on group membership. Doesn't matter if you're a male or female. Doesn't matter if your skin is brown or black or white or yellow or green or blue or purple. It doesn't matter what your religious preferences are. Maybe if you're not religious, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much income you earn. Maybe you earn a lot of income. Maybe you earn very little income. You all have the same individual rights. And just as importantly about those rights, you do not have a right to something someone else makes.
Right.
You don't have a right to what other people earn. What you have a right is to what is yours rightfully by nature. You have a right to your person, to your talent, to your labor, to your speech, your body, your mind. That's what you have a right to. No one should come and hit you on the head and take your stuff. That's wrong. You have a right to your property, your freedom, but you don't have a right to make other people do things for you.
Right. As we're talking about this, and I'm going to jump back to the progressive sandbox just a little bit. I actually started to think about prisons, right? Prisons are a place where people aren't free. You have a warden and a staff that is telling you where to be, when to be, what you're eating, what you're doing, what your job is.
All day, all night.
And they're making sure you're healthy. They have a doctor on staff.
Yep.
You're not paying for your doctor's visits.
Sounds to me like a central planning paradise.
You get three square meals a day.
Yep.
You have a bed to sleep in. You've got a roof over your head.
Yep.
All of those things. But you know what happens in prisons that we don't talk about? People align in groups. And they often end up getting involved with people purely for safety purposes. They get involved with people for the sole purpose of protection, safety, fear from other groups stealing from you, fear from other groups hurting you, fear from the warden and the staff hurting you. And you start accepting a belief in things that maybe you didn't believe in. Right? We've seen that in dozens of movies.
Yeah.
The age-old storyline is there was the movie American History X, and the guy walks in, and it was Edward Norton Jr.
Okay.
And he walks into prison, and he's a white supremacist, and he realizes really early on that maybe he doesn't want to be a Nazi anymore, and he's got to start this battle of the Nazi group over here, the skinheads over here are saying, hey, you've got all the tattoos and everything else. Come join us. We'll take care of you in here. And meanwhile, the guy he becomes closest friends with is a black guy. And he wants to go hang out with those guys. And he knows if he goes and hangs out with those guys, these guys over here are gonna kill him. Have you noticed that started happening in the safety? And for those listening, I'm using air quotes.
Right.
In the safety of free society or supposedly free society, we have people pretending to be parts of groups,
right,
for the benefits that those groups get. You have Rachel Dolezal pretending to be black,
right,
so that she can benefit from the specific rights being given. Right. We have people talking about gender fluidity so that they can be a part of a group even if they don't naturally fit that group. That's something that happens in unfree prison societies.
I mentioned before this a timeless truth about government that as you have more subsidies and regulations, you get more corruption, and that's always true. And here are a couple of these are timeless truths that apply to all governments, not just the United States, any government anywhere. When you subsidize a thing, you get more of the thing,
right? And
when you tax a thing, you get less of the thing. So if you tax businesses, for example, the more you tax the businesses, you get less business, fewer business. Eventually, businesses start closing because you tax them too much. If you subsidize poor people, you get more poor people. You get both more actual poor people, and you get more people who aren't really poor, but they figure out how to qualify under, how to fill out the form and qualify. So the point is you get more people eligible for these subsidies. Same thing if you subsidize tribal identity politics. If you say, hey, we have a new definition of rights, and rights includes special perks for people with dark skin.
Right.
Then you get the Rachel Dolezal saying, I want those perks. I'm part of that group of it, even though she's not actually part of the group. When that's all the affirmative action, all the identity politics kinds of rights, they're forms of subsidies. They're subsidizing, whether with money or perks and privileges, somehow subsidizing membership in that group. So what that does is it incentivizes more people to affiliate by groups, rather than saying, I'm an individual human being, I'm an individual citizen. The law is supposed to protect my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, period.
I think we're probably getting to a point we should start wrapping up, and we can always continue this conversation.
Yeah.
But if you're a candidate and you're considering running in 2022, 2024, 2026 for the next several cycles, I want to encourage you. If you work for a party and you're going to be working with candidates, encourage you to talk to them about what does that sandbox look like?
The self-government sandbox.
The self-government
That's
sandbox. Right. Forget playing in the, well, what if we adjust this dial in the progressive model? But no, we're done with giving different rights to different people. Come play in our sandbox where everybody gets the same rights.
That's right.
Where everybody is treated equally. And you know what? If you're not willing to treat everyone equally in that sandbox, we don't want you.
Yes.
If you're a neo-Nazi, if you're a skinhead, if you're actually one of those people, not the so-called fascists that progressives like to label you, but if you're actually one of those people, and we know there are those people out there, we don't want you in that sandbox.
This is a really important thing, right? In other words, in the sandbox of self-government, neo-Nazis are unwelcome for the exact same reason that proponents of race-based affirmative action are unwelcome. Because both of them, what they have in common is they say, let's divide people into groups and treat different people in different groups differently. That's exactly right. That's not the self-government sandbox. The self-government sandbox is equality under the law. Whether you own much property or little property, no matter your personality, you're going to be protected in your life, in your liberty, in your private property, in the freedom to pursue happiness, to take care of the people that you love, run your business the way you want to run it, take care of yourself the way you want to take care of yourself, take care of those you love the way you think best and they agree with. That's life in self-government. If you take a risk, the risk is on you. And what that means is if there are great rewards, the rewards are all yours. And if there's failure, you suffer the failure. That's part of being an independent, free, adult, mature human being and citizen of a free country. That's self-government.
And for those who do become successful in that sandbox, there are going to be people who want to live in that sandbox who struggle. There are people who have actual illnesses. There are people who have actual setbacks in their life. There are people who actually have trouble. And it's up to you to decide who you want to help, how, and in what way.
That's right.
And make those decisions for yourself. But it doesn't mean that just because you're in a self-governing sandbox that you ignore everyone else around you.
Correct.
The point is work together. Find ways that I can provide you something of value. You can provide me something of value in return, and help those people who need it based on your own evaluation. And that sandbox to me goes to our four virtues, right? And if you need to understand what does it take to live in that sandbox, how do you know? It's accepting the ideas of self-reliance. It's accepting the ideas of self-restraint, of self-assertion, and then understanding what is within the bounds, what is within the laws, what is a real right, the civic knowledge.
Yep.
And everything else doesn't matter.
We should remind our listeners, for those who haven't looked it up yet, we have this little booklet titled The Introduction to American Citizenship. And most of this, it includes the text of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution with some key subjects highlighted in both. And there's a short essay. It's 18 or 20 pages long. It's not very long, making the case about the main qualities, the main virtues of citizenship that you're talking about. And that's available to all of our members.
And our members need to remember, if they want to be guardians in the Vino Veritas Society, if they want to say nos sumus custodes and mean it, they need to understand that.
Yeah.
And at that point, to that point also, don't forget about the toolboxes. You have done a beautiful job for people who don't want to just read the book, but want to hear it from you directly. We've got some great toolboxes on the website for them to go through and learn all of those things.
That's right.
I
think there's more to say about these toolboxes,
Sure.
and we're going to continue this conversation because I think patriotic constitutionalists who want to run as a Republican and they want to hold up this idea of self-government as the alternative to progressive central planning, there's more to say and there's more to think about, and likely different candidates will want to talk about this in their own voice, and we can offer some more details, and we'll keep this discussion going.
And for those who are looking for help, this is a society. This is
come join us.
We are part of this, and it's not, you and I don't exist outside of it. If they want our help and their members, reach out, ask.
That's absolutely right.
Use the resources available to you, and then ask us. And we're here to help. I hope at least to start, we have continued to show what it is to be a guardian of this American idea. And I think this is the first step towards pushing our members and encouraging our members to say, I'm done with the progressive sandbox. I'm going to start building the constitutional republic, the free, self-governing sandbox, because that seems like a better place to live for me.
Building the brand of self-government.
And then the Vino Veritas Society will be there to guard it from the people who just want to come in and pillage.
We are the guardians.
Nos somos custodes.